I'm very happy to bring up Randall Aker, the president and CEO of Exhibitor Media Group, to introduce this wonderful panel. Randall?
Thanks. Yeah, and it's true, Jeff did attack me afterwards, and David and Rachel Wimberly of TSNN. I think the most important part is I probably make it pretty visible that I have passion for what we do, and I'm not generally shy when I'm out in public. Lee will attest to that. But it's important that we're having these conversations, and for today to have the panel that we've got up here of some pretty high-profile folks that have been playing in this game for a long time. Jeff, I'm like, yeah, sign me up. I'll figure out how to make it fit into the schedule. So I want to introduce the folks that you may not know up on the stage. The bios would take us our whole 60-minute session, so we're not going to go there. But David Dubois is the president and CEO of IAEE, and if you don't know what the acronym is, it's the International Association of Exhibitions and Events. So welcome, David.
Thank
you. Julie Smith is Senior VP of National Sales at GES and is also David's current worst nightmare as chairperson of IAEE's board of directors. And she is now, talk about being engaged, she is the president-elect of ESCA, the Services and Contractors Association. Ryan, welcome, Julie. Ryan Stroger is the Senior VP of Exhibitions, Conferences, and Sales at IAPA. How many of you enjoy roller coasters and amusement parks? He is with the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions and is David's soon-to-be new nightmare as chairperson-elect for IAEE Board of Directors. So welcome, Ryan. And last but certainly not least is a longtime industry veteran and client of one of the folks in the room. Suzanne Skinner is a corporate marketing person who was brave enough to take the stage in front of this audience. She is the director of global event marketing at Infinidat. So welcome, Suzanne. All right, so there's a little ground rule for today because we've only got 60 minutes. And there are conversations that I have heard in this room for all of the years of the 22 years I've been in this business. They keep coming up. We all want to talk about material handling and drayage, and we all want to talk about unions and labor, and we don't have enough time for that today. So we will not be broaching what is a much-needed topic of conversation. It's not happening today. So a little ground rule for how that all plays.
You're up, bud.
I think that Jeff reinforced that there's an importance that we start having conversations. And EDP Access is one of the cogs in the machine that is face-to-face marketing. And you know, David's group and Julie and Ryan's group have an exhibitions mean business campaign. Trade shows and event marketing does mean business, but we have to understand better how all of these cogs in the machine are interplaying, and that requires conversations. I do tons of focus groups at Exhibitor. Our editorial team is talking to corporate marketers every day, all year long. We've got CTSMers. We want to hear the voice of the corporate marketer, and too many times I'm at events where the corporate marketer is the last person that's talked about. And so the importance of realizing that the exhibitor is part of the machine. It's not all about organizers and attendees. The exhibitor is part of that conversation, and that's really why I started going on the speaking tour where Jeff saw my session at ECEF. How many of you in the room go to your clients' shows that they're participating in? I would hope that all y'all, we're not in Texas, but we are south, are going to see how your clients are engaging in their process. How many of you attend other industry conferences and events that are related to face-to-face marketing? Now, that's actually higher than I thought it would be. I thought maybe 30%. About half of the hands were raised. That is the opportunity where you can learn the other stakeholders' roles in the organization. And so one of the things that I think that David and Julie and Ryan can really talk about is what are some of the things that they're doing and talking about that may or may not be aware in your awareness level that maybe you want to become part of. So David, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about some of the things that are conversation-based that IAEE is doing?
Well, thank you and good morning. And Jeff, thanks for the invitation as well. IAEE has a little over 1,300 member organizations as a trade association, and members are in 52 countries, a little over 10,000 individuals are represented. So obviously the advocacy and education pillars of our strategic plan, you heard about your own strategies going forward into 2017, are focused on advocacy and education, which is pretty typical of most associations. What we've done a little bit different this year, Randy, is we've hired a futurist to help us identify what the exhibitions and live events industry may look like 7 years from now. We worked our way back, now we're working our way forward, and on Monday we'll have the final, not final because nothing's ever final, discussion with our board about where we're going to go to help take our industry forward. Obviously, advocacy will continue to be critically important, and our description of advocacy is really twofold. It's what are we doing at the legislative level, predominantly in the United States, but with members in 52 countries. We're asked to, Julie and I have been to a few unique places this past year, and Ryan will be with me next year, to go and advocate and meet with government officials about the importance of the exhibition industry on a global basis. This year, we celebrated our third legislative action day called Exhibitions Day. EDPA is a partner. We want to make sure that you write down June 7th next year, Washington, D.C. If you have an appetite to assist in advocating very positively in support of the exhibition industry, which all of us in this room are part of, please join us in Washington, D.C. There's no reg fee, and we make a difference. This year we focused on two major issues. One that was advocated by the American Hotel Lodging Association on piracy and poaching. And what that is room block, bogus websites, intercepts of exhibitors and attendees outside the official room blocks. That's still in play. Legislation is pending, and hopefully in the next 30 days we'll get some resolve on that. But the biggest one we had is we supported the American Society of Association Executives' position on the overtime ruling. And all of us in this room probably read this past week that an injunction to pause that, those regulations out of the U.S. Department of Labor is now in play. We had 100 people advocating and meeting with representatives in the Capitol all day long, so we had some voice in helping to at least pause and now stratify, hopefully, over several years, the overtime regulations that affect all of us in this business, because we don't have an eight-hour day.
And we talked about that a little bit in the Management Issues Forum on Wednesday afternoon, that IAEE was taking that stance quite vocally in support of our industry.
So lastly, Randy, I want to just touch on, and it may come up in conversation, one of the issues that all of us in this room live with every day, and it's become more intense in our minds, is safety and security. So last month, with the support of the Department of Homeland Security Safety Act Office, write that down. If you don't know anything about this, Google it, Safety Act Office, Department of Homeland Security. We are developing smart outcomes, best practices, and guidelines for convention centers to start. Phase 2 will be hotels. Stadiums are already in the works to develop LEED certification-like accreditation and certification levels to, bottom line, enhance the safety and security of the exhibitions and live events, phase 1, that happen in convention centers. ESCA is a partner EDPA is a partner. We have 25 organizations, Randy, that have already stepped up. So I could spend a whole hour on that. I won't, but hopefully it'll come up in conversation as well. So catch me afterwards or send me an email if you want more information. I'd be happy to share that with you.
Yep. Julie, as current chairperson, you've got some pretty strong beliefs on getting engaged. Talk a little bit about your point of view.
Well, I kind of have the volunteerism gene, obviously, as you can tell, and I think it's extremely important that we give back to the industry that gives us a great living. And so we try to get our members engaged on many, many different types of levels. One of the most important one right now is the Young Professionals Program, because we are trying to bring along the next generation. And one of the things that I am passionate about is trying to figure out how we can kind of reimagine and reinvent this industry, because the next generation may not want to work the same way that we have worked. I look out in the audience here, and I think there are a lot of peers in my age group, and we probably spent a lot of time away from our families and a lot of hours and weekends in this career. And how can we look at it going forward so that we can attract the next generation of trend centers and creative minds and keep them in the industry? So we have a lot of young professionals initiatives. Also extremely passionate about women's issues and the wage gap and pay equity. And IAEE is supporting the White House Equal Pay Act. There is a link on the IAEE website. We have a very popular women's leadership forum every spring, and it has now expanded into where we have developed a microsite that has housed information on, pay grades and links for all kinds of resources for women, and that Equal Pay Pledge link is on the website. So looking at how we can continue to reward diversity in our industry, keep creative people in the industry, and make sure that they're equally compensated.
Yep. And I was having a conversation earlier this week with Gwen Hill and with Amanda Helgamo. There's a new group of people on top of the women's and exhibitions that was meeting here. There's an association for women and events now that is really trying to create platforms to further that as well. Suzanne, one of the things that we talked about as we were prepping for this call was a little research study that I did at TSNN's presentation and at ECEF's presentation of about 375 total show organizers. It said, how many of you hold an exhibits advisory board meeting to understand what your exhibitors are thinking and feeling? And I think the quote that was given was, Randall Aker says, shame on you, because only about 30% of the crowd even talks to their exhibitors. Talk a little bit about that, Suzanne, the importance of that dialogue from you as a corporate marketer.
Thank you. It is a delight to be included in this very esteemed panel and to be the voice of an exhibitor. The end result that we're all looking to achieve, which is a great event, is a partnership. And even though I am your customer, it's clearly, as we've seen the industry evolve and change over the years, it's clearly come to more of, I think, a partnership between the vendor side and the supplier side. And it's one that I work very hard to achieve in my own work as a global event marketer. The industry that I'm in, I think, can be distilled into two words. It's show and tell. And my events are part of a larger program that has multiple touch points, a lot of telling in the development of our messaging and proof points, but the showpiece is the event that I do. And it's so critical for me to be engaged with the suppliers, to develop a relationship and a partnership to make that event successful. There are no do-overs. Every event has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we work very hard to progress that along into the 3 or 4 days of exhibition that elevate my company's brand and technology.
Yep. So another one of the conversations that's happening, no matter, for those of you, the half of you that are going to other conferences, how many of you have heard beat to death data as part of the conversation? It's talked about all the time, like extensively, ad nauseum at some level. And so but it's important. Throughout the election process, it was about what is the data and what do they know about online users, and all of these massive databases that are helping us understand how the public is consuming what they're doing is all coming into the trade show world. Ryan, why don't you talk a little bit about IAEE's kind of perspective on big data and how it plays in the trade show world?
Well, I can certainly address from a show management perspective. There's all sorts of data that's available to us as show organizers, coming from all sorts of disparate sources, from registration data, our membership data, if you're a trade association like mine is. There's demographic data, purchasing data, badge scans, access to different events, and to the extent where we're getting into RFID, low power Bluetooth, and so forth, the ability to heat map a show floor and figure out traffic patterns and movement on a show floor, all that generates data. And at the end of the day, what's important to show organizers is what do we do with that data? And from an exhibitor perspective as well, what data is actionable and how can we best manage that data, share that data in a way that makes sense, that helps the exhibitors in turn make appropriate decisions about their participation. Yep. So I think that's the challenge from a show management perspective is now we have all of those data sources. How do we merge them together and come up with something that's actually actionable and make logical, sensible decisions about ways to best augment our show and make it a more robust participation for our exhibitors and for our attendees. And that's a heavy lift. I don't have people on my staff that are trained in econometrics or in certain data management and statistics work that need to be done for it. I think there's actually quite a industry an industry void, perhaps for agencies or outside services to be able to help associations or other show management firms tackle that for us, where we don't have the ability to onboard that service ourselves.
How many of you in the crowd, as servicing your corporate clients, wish that you had more data about the shows that your client is participating in? How many of you are getting anything? Who are you getting it from? Come on, you guys are loud. I've been to some of the parties. Where are you getting the data from? They're sharing it with you, okay? So is it prospectus type data? Yeah, I'm seeing you guys are still sleeping from the after party, aren't you? Jeff did this to me, 8:45 a.m. after the President's Gala. Really, it's an issue for Suzanne's peers that are out on the road tour speaking with me about, there's this whole issue about who owns the data. And I polled the audience of show organizers and I said, who owns the leads that the exhibitors capture in their booth? Who do you think owns the leads? Raise your hands if you think the show organizer owns the leads. If you were in the room at ECEF or TSNN, 70% of you would have raised your hands that say you own the leads that Suzanne captures in her booth. There's the level of disconnect on who owns what. You own the whole damn file. They get to own the leads that they captured the attention of. So it creates this whole dialogue about who owns the data. So David, talk a little bit about how, as IAEE is working with show organizers and data issues and things that are coming up in those conversations.
Well, what I would add, and I was at a customer advisory board in Philadelphia yesterday morning. We had a similar conversation about this, Randy, and there were about 20 meeting planner show organizers in the room. And we had a robust conversation, and I did a little quick survey. Less than 5% of the ladies and gentlemen in the room yesterday, and maybe you can ask this audience too, have a written data management plan. If you don't put it in writing, how do you manage it? How do you build metrics around it? How do you make yourselves and your fellow department heads, the ladies and gentlemen in marketing and exhibit management and operations, and certainly from an association standpoint, how do you make yourself accountable if you don't have a written plan? So I'm curious how many of you have written plans in your own companies on how you manage data to be more effective? You don't have to raise your hands, but if you're not there, I would strongly suggest that you work on that as one of your goals in 2017, Randy.
Well, and how you're managing your client's data stream. And one of the bones of contention is all right, here's this prospectus data that the shows are sharing with their clients, but then there is the lack of, Lee's been pushing for shows to have audits for all 22 years I've worked at Exhibitor, but very few shows actually have audited data. And so Suzanne's peers on my panel were like, just give me something that says who was there, what is the buying profile, what do they want to consume. You don't have to give me the database of names and contact information, because we all know that if that happens, we end up with opt-out rates like the National Retail Federation has. Their show has an 85% opt-out rate. Do you know why? Because they gave their exhibitors the attendee list, and they bombarded the hell out of it. And so the attendee says, I'm out. I'm not going to deal with thousands of emails coming in. So we all lose in that scenario. So the understanding of who owns what data and the willingness to share with the corporate marketer, at least at a level that helps them to quantify what should their goals and objectives be. So technology is coming into the conversation, and you mentioned just a little bit of dabbling about that and how we're using technology. Julie, why don't you talk about some of the things that you're seeing on how technology is being used for the data and the results and how it all works?
Well, I think it's really interesting to see how quickly the dialogue has changed, because not very long ago the question was, Big Brother is watching and I don't want my data to be collected. And now I think we all acknowledge that every time we go online, make a purchase, look something up, register for something, data is being collected. I think there are studies that show that there are probably, unless you're living in a cabin without internet and without a computer, there are probably about 5,000 pieces of data out there available about you. So you see where the problem comes in of how to use it. But there are a lot of very interesting things going on right now. For instance, the big discussion right now is how do you provide a customizable, personalized journey for the attendee? Because obviously, attendees act differently now than they used to. They may not want to spend as much time at the show. They might want to be very targeted. A lot of it depends upon the size of the show. And so it's how do you use the data, and where do you collect the right data to provide that kind of customized journey for the attendee? There are registration systems out there right now that can work with exhibitors that literally gather their goals from the exhibiting company, about how many leads they want to get in what period of time and et cetera, and can give them real-time feedback during the show as to whether or not they are achieving those goals, and give them feedback on what they can do immediately to change it. So there are a lot of interesting capabilities out there. Obviously, beacons right now. Ryan mentioned all the heat mapping on the show floor, and every kind of wearable technology. I mean, we're close to one of Ryan's members, Disney here, and they've kind of started the trend with what they do with wristbands, et cetera. But you're going to see a lot of that type of technology in our industry, because people want that kind of immediate feedback, immediate journey technology.
Yeah, and as really you guys are extensions to the marketing departments for your clients, right? And so some of the shows are, because of the price, whether it's near field communication or it's RFID or it's beacons or it's video analysis, it's cost prohibitive on a scale when you're talking about CESs and those kinds of things for most people that can't afford. So the shows are doing sampling sizes where random and select attendees are being beaconed, and they're trying to help the exhibitors understand how people are consuming that show. And that is stuff that you guys can use to help your client better understand what shows they should be in and where they should potentially be situated within the show itself. So One of the questions that I have for you really was kind of brought up again a little bit yesterday. How many of you in the room, I know there's some of you actual divisions for this, but how many of you in the room are helping your clients measure and quantify and justify ROI or ROO? Quarter of the room. So Suzanne, I know every day you're justifying the expenses. And I know in just conversations, your exhibit house, you're talking about all those things. Talk a little bit about how that partnership helps you to justify the management participation in shows.
I think it's crucial to partner with not just a good event, an exhibit house, but a fantastic one. And I'm very blessed to have a 15-year partnership with my exhibit house. And I rely heavily on their input for each show. They are an extension of my marketing team when we decide to take our booth out and participate in an event. And for my part, I rely on those demographics that you were talking about, the level of attendee, the job title of the attendee, how technical is that audience going to be? Because that dictates not only my investment in the event, but who from my company we send and how we position ourselves, and whether or not we actually bring physical equipment there. It costs me $10,000 to ship a rack to a show, so I need to make sure the right level of people are there. And with respect to the relationship I have with my exhibit house, I rely heavily on them for everything from the show logistics and for helping me to set deadlines and deliverables, to their relationships with the people in the audience today, with the I&D companies, with the city managers, and with the show organizers, because they have so much information from their experience on the event side of things that they share with me, that when we sit down to plan an event, we try to do that and give ourselves a 12-week planning cycle, understanding that that's not always possible, but we invoke, I call them the 3 C's, the communication, collaboration, and cooperation, to pull together the data from both sides of the fence to give us a successful event.
You know, it's back to understanding all you can about the attendee persona and understanding the buyer profiles and sharing that which of these 10% of the total attendance I want to pay attention to, and how good did I do at capturing that 10%, right? And it's the conversations happening with show organizers like Ryan and sitting down with key anchor exhibitors and having dialogue about what are their strategic objectives. Talk a little bit about how IAPA is working with your exhibitors in that kind of regard.
We absolutely do. I think it's incumbent on us as show management to best understand the motivations for exhibitors' participation in our events, just as you were saying earlier. Not necessarily, there are certainly some exhibitors that want to see as many people as possible, and that's certainly understandable, but not necessarily in all cases, and different companies have different motivations for participation, whether it's product launches, branding, marketing, new lead generation. It could be for using the show as a focus group, basically, to test out new products or services that they're bringing to market. It could be just for competitive observation as well, and overall brand positioning. So there are lots of different reasons why a company may want to participate, and that participation can take lots of different formats: sponsorship, advertising, traditional booth space, non-traditional booth space. It could be meeting rooms or suites off the show floor, whatever format that show makes available. And I think as show management, it's important to us to be able to listen if a company is saying, well, a booth on the show floor doesn't make sense to me. And I get that. That doesn't always make sense for all companies in all situations. Well, what is it that you're looking to do at our event during that week? How can we still engage you in that conversation within the overall framework of our association show, so that you are still a participant, you're meeting with the buyers and attendees that you want to during the course of the week, but not outboarding or suitcasing or doing something that could be detrimental to the other 98% of the companies that are abiding within the show structure. So I think some flexibility from a show management perspective is important, to be able to broaden that and fulfill the obligations of those exhibitors. And certainly there are agencies that work with potential exhibitors that are bringing those dialogues to show management and saying, listen, this is what they want to do.
Yeah.
How can we work together to make that happen? And I think that's terrific.
Yep.
To be able
How
to
many
engage
of you in the room are doing what he just said? How many of you are proactively going after a show organizer for dialogue on behalf of your client? There's only about 10 hands in the air. And so as you're in that proactive of how am I creating this whole debate about commoditization of our marketplace, right? So how am I creating something that the commodity can't do? And that's engagement with your client's stakeholders in understanding the best that you can as their expert in getting whatever you can out of Ryan and any of his peer group, because Ryan's an exception to the normal rule. He proactively goes out and has these conversations. Shows that are winning at TSNN, there were a number of folks that were winning awards because they regularly engage their exhibitors and their vendors. But they're not the norm. So take the role of advocate for your client, make the difference, and now you're not a commodity. You're a solution provider for them.
If I could, I'll just add to that. That's my role, and with all deference to service contractors, my job isn't to sell concrete, and I keep staying on our sales team on that. Our job isn't necessarily to sell booth space; it's to sell access to our attendees, and that's if booth space and that spot on the show floor isn't what's optimal for everyone, then don't just say no, because that's all we say. No, let's start that dialogue, and don't start with no. I want to hear what they're suggesting, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I'll let you just 1 second interrupt. My favorite quote from one of the panelists that you guys heard at ECEF was a show organizer's employee talking to potential exhibitors, and this is literally the quote: "I don't care about your goals or your objectives. All I care is you pay your bill on time." Holy shit. Robert, I got a shit in there.
You got two in.
Now two. Yeah.
That is an oh my God kind of moment. And it's like, come on, really? That's the kind of thing we have to make sure we're having conversations that makes that kind of stuff go away for people like Suzanne. How many times have you heard dialing for dollars from your peer group?
They do try to upsell. I will say that that's part of the business. But my obligation is to know what it is my company needs and to go in with that in mind. But I'm always open to hearing, as you mentioned, to hearing options. If a booth space or a large booth space doesn't make the most sense, what else can I do that will still help me to achieve my objectives?
Yep. And Julie, we'll go into the kind of that extended experience thing in a few minutes, if that was what you were going to address.
Sure.
We'll go to that. We'll go to that in just a couple of minutes. So don't forget. Hold your thought. One of the other things that kind of blows my mind, that is as simple as it can possibly get, is this whole issue of lead retrieval. We're back to the who owns it, right? And Suzanne's peer group that is on the panel with me, it is probably it's in their top 5 biggest pain points. And how many of you have clients who are using their own proprietary lead retrieval devices in their booth? How many of you have those same clients screaming, saying, "I'm so effing frustrated, I can't believe it"? Yep. So here we sit where horror stories of, it took them 3 weeks to give me my leads. It wasn't even my leads, it was somebody else's leads. It gave me incomplete data because as a third-party registration lead retrieval device, it matches a number and gives you a data dump later, and you end up with incomplete or non-standardized data fields, which stops you dead in your tracks on CRM and marketing automation. And in an immediate gratification society where the attendee wants the lead 5 seconds, the information from that lead 5 seconds after they swipe their badge, now we're a month out. Talk a little bit about the frustrations from the corporate marketer, and maybe kind of enlighten the half of the group that hasn't been suffering through this
So
pain.
I haven't had too many horror stories, but leads are so important. When we decide on an event, we set up a cost per lead metric for the number of leads we get against the actual cost of the show. And there's a certain number that I have to work in to justify the expense of that show. We also like to say it's out the door in 24. So when I have a lead, I either need to turn it over to my direct sales force or my channels or my inside sales force to process that lead. The longer delays that we have on that, I think the lead weakens. The interest may wane. We have a lot at risk if we can't process those leads in a really quick turnaround time. And I do think I own the leads. As the exhibitor, I've paid for the privilege of collecting those leads. And I have never had a show organizer tell me that I did not own them, but I have had colleagues who have had that experience.
So let's come to one of the trends. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to add one thing. Absolutely, you should own the leads that you get. I think that's incumbent on us as show management. I do want to, in case the question wasn't phrased right, though, I think the show management should also have that information. I think it's not necessarily one or the other, but I think both. You should absolutely have all the leads. Not necessarily do I care who came to her booth. I just want to know that there was some level of engagement. So again, going back to that data topic, it is important for me to know, not necessarily
We do different things with the leads,
right.
with the data.
And so it helps me to know that 70, 80, 200 individuals came to their booth, and in aggregate across the show floor, what level of productivity am I seeing? How does that change year to year? I think that's important data for a show manager to have. So that information is of interest to me, but certainly not at the expense of the exhibitor, who I think it's most important to get the leads in the most timely fashion. I can get it weeks later, that's fine. They should be getting it as soon as possible, if not immediately.
But you're looking for a number. I need the contact information.
Oh,
I need the
absolutely.
outreach, and that's the
Right.
difference. And I have no objection. I have no objection to sharing that at all. That makes sense for both of us to have that data.
Let's come back to a little bit about the data and what your customers, what you can help them to understand about who's at the show. And you've got all these buying profiles and what is their buying influence and whatnot. But at Sear Predict, there was a little conversation that was a little creepy, and I asked ultimately the guy, was it accurate? And he said it was. So Julie, why don't you talk a little bit about this concept of crystal nose?
Crystal Nose, yes. So there's a website, if you haven't been to it, called Crystal Nose. And if you sign on to the website, you can pull up your own profile, but also, I believe, 5 more or something at no charge without actually, costing you anything. And it is amazing, again, how much data can be culled about you off of all of the social media sites that is just sitting there waiting for someone. I mean, it's a really fun tool if you're a salesperson, because it tells you all kinds of things like how you like to be communicated with, what things are important to you, what your hobbies are, what, all kinds of personal data, and it's just sitting out there to be had. Again, because every time you go on any kind of a website or social media, data is being collected. Whether you know it or not. So it's scary but exciting at the same time, I think.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a wave of the future.
Yeah. So one of the other aspects of data and evolution of our marketplace is this whole how do we matching of buyers and sellers. And there was a show that was at TSNN's awards, and they've created their own proprietary software that matches the needs and objectives of the attendee with what people are buying and selling on the trade show floor, or selling on the trade show floor, and a full 1/3 of their fairly large trade show floor is nothing but meeting spaces. And the number of meetings that are arranged over their 4-day show last year was 24,000. This year, it was 35,000. So we've got this trending of knowing so much data about what each other has for interest, and so how do we create connection opportunities for a fee. The attendee pays a fee to do the matching and meeting sign-up thing, and the exhibitor pays a fee to be able to engage beyond what we have for happenstance on the show floor with prearranged meetings that are happening in that 1/3 of the space in prearranged meeting rooms. So, David, there's also some other show organizers that are really kind of blending the mix of meetings, hosted buyers, and traditional trade shows. Talk a little bit about what IAE is seeing.
Well, you're right on, and that example is the prime example of success in that model. And it really comes back to what we convey and what we will experience. And if some of you come to our show next week in Anaheim, on the expo floor for 6+ hours, is that kind of matching, those kind of technology companies that are available to help you as a designer and producer to give more value to your clients. But at the end of the day, it's all about communications. Because as a show organizer, Ryan wants to make sure that all his attendees understand the products and services available, and predominantly on a smartphone, the access points, the quick time meeting capabilities that are available. And then Suzanne wants to be able to have that same access. So how is that communicated in terms of it is to your benefit to get engaged in this kind of matching programming? So that's what we're going to see a lot more. And myself, I'm excited to walk our own trade show floor the next Tuesday and Wednesday to see what kind of new technologies are out there. And I'm sure, you know, all of us, Ryan as a show organizer, and certainly Julie as an official service contractor, on behalf of our clients, because we all have different kind of stakeholders and clients in this ecosystem that we're all in.
I do that too. I walk the show floor to see
Good.
what other exhibitors are doing, to see what technology is being showcased in terms of AV, and I take that back with me. I unabashedly take cell phone photos if I find a hot-looking booth.
Very good.
Yep. So one of the things that I knew I couldn't walk off this stage if we talked about trends was what's happening with people's budgets for 2017. 2016's budgets were flat. No new monies came flowing into Suzanne's peers' pockets. And from the ones that I've been out on the tour with and others that I've been doing field research with, same story, but Travis will be fielding a formal survey from exhibitor from our readership to give you the larger view that will be coming in a few weeks. But it's really what's happening with the conversation about if my budget is not increasing and my show services are increasing, what is that triggering with my participation in the events? And a number of them say that as the expenses increase, they just reduce what they do at that event. There are other folks that are coming and saying, you know what, we saw in our research for 2016 that sponsorships were up by 10%. They wanted to create integrated engagement points throughout the event, and guess where that money came from? It came from the booth's budget. There was no new monies that fell from the sky, and everybody was happy. So stay tuned for what's happening more on the budget expectations for 2017, which will be coming out shortly. One of the other things that we talked a little bit about, I can't remember, they all blur together, yesterday or the day before, was what's happening with your clients' marketing departments. 2009 saw us all getting kicked in the teeth, and everybody on the stage saw it as well as everybody in the room. But the client, we've got people on our advisory boards that are a department of one and they do 150 shows. We all know they're not doing it by themselves. 44% of our readership of corporate marketers that read Exhibitor Magazine are a department of uno. 36% of those folks have a helper in their department. So who's getting the work done? I can be here all day. Actually, I have to leave at 3:45 for the airport, but who's doing the work? You guys are. So let's raise the hands. How many of you have clients that are on your, or employees on your payroll that really only do work for your clients? Well, but there's some people that it's exclusive. I mean, it's nothing more than a pass-through. You're not just handling their project. That's just what they do, is manage your client's project. So there's a fair number of people in the room that you're basically finally getting that thing that you dreamed about forever. I've got a seat at the marketing table. And then you're going to say, well, but I only have the recommenders. I only wish I had the final decision maker. So Lee Knight and I were sitting at lunch. We eat lunch most days together and talk about this crazy business. And he says, you know what? And I was kind of pissed at the end because I'm like, I've been doing this for 22 years. I'm pretty smart. Why didn't I think of that? But then I took glory because he's been in it longer than it took him this long to think of it. We asked our readership, what percentage of your recommendations are actually executed as the final decision? If you were in the session earlier this week where I said this, you'll know the answer. What percentage of recommendations are the final decision? 81%. We had some people awake in the class. So when you're sitting in front of your bosses, Suzanne, they're relying on you to run the program. That's why they hired you, right? So your recommendations, do they go pretty strongly with what we found in our research?
I think they do.
So Ryan, you've seen some things that are happening in terms of these guys engaging more. Talk a little bit more about agencies and their play with your organization.
Yeah, no, I think it's important for, as I mentioned earlier, for us to engage with all stakeholders in the exhibition and events industry. So that's exhibitors, attendees, agencies, general service contractors, facilities, you name it, anybody that's involved in the process. It's not one at the exclusion of the other. And there are certainly a lot of exhibitors at our show or shows that utilize agencies or external services to help bring them to the show and help them meet their objectives. And in many cases are the ones that are suggesting maybe a 30 by 30 doesn't make sense. This year, let's do a 20 by 30, but we'll do a sponsorship. Right. And that's terrific. If that's what allows you to get to your stated goal as an exhibitor, then I'm all on board with that. That's fine. And there are many cases, too, where I'm happy to say that an agency will help an exhibitor make the decision to stay in a show. If it's between a 30 by 30 and nothing, a lot of times exhibitors will often have that knee-jerk reaction. I can't afford a 30 by 30, so I'm just going to take a year off. Well, that doesn't need to be the ultimate answer. You can still have a smaller presence, and if that's the right size for you, then that's perfect for me. I don't need you to buy more space than you need. That may be anathema to most show management or show organizers, but I don't feel that you should be spending inappropriately for your presence if it's more than what you need. Don't bite off more than you can chew. The only challenge I have is when an agency serves as the gatekeeper to the exhibitor. And I have to, if an exhibitor is challenging their value or their participation in the show, and an agency is saying, well, you got to go through me to get that information to them, that's kind of muddying that transparency of the value of the show. I really do feel it's important for me not just to engage with the agency. I don't want to take them out of that conversation, but I also do feel it's important for me to be able to also have a portion of that conversation directly with the end customer as well, in this case being the exhibitor, rather than always having to work through an intermediary. Yeah. And there are many cases where that still continues to be a challenge for us as show management.
So Suzanne reinforced earlier that her exhibit builder agency is her partner, and that's critical in the partnership. And Ryan's seeing more and more of that. And I'm hearing more of the success stories of show organizers who are creating joint meetings. I know Julie, I know that there's, from a contractor status, there's some joint meetings of anchor exhibitors with the contractor, with the organizer, with the city, actually doing city tours and understanding how do we collectively make the most of doing this together. So anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned commodities, and certainly we used to sell our services like commodities. But I think you'll see now that all official contractors consider themselves marketing agencies now, and we've all expanded to where, because we have so many clients who don't have the depth of their own staffs, that we are having to help guide them so that it's not a transactional-based strategy, but in fact, they are meeting with exhibitors and trying to find out things like what is your budget buying pattern, and because we find all the time that maybe you're selling your sponsorships in the middle of the year when your clients' budgets were closed already 6 months ago. And it's understanding their long-term strategy rather than, again, just trying to make it a single transaction, because I think the old model might have had a show organizer where someone was selling the space and someone else was selling the sponsorship and someone else might be calling them about a particular event, and it all ends up being these single transactions versus getting with the client and saying, we want to know what your short-term and long-term strategy is and how we can be a part of it and how we can help you meet your goals.
Yep. All right, we're going to transition to the next trend, international. Domestic North American people in the audience. How many of you have clients who are doing things globally? A fairly good amount. All right, because EDPA has a 23% international membership base, see, I was paying attention too. How many of you international in the room have your international clients either coming to North America or going to other regions of the world that isn't their continent? So you're seeing a lot of that as well. We had a research study that Travis did, I don't know, middle of last year, that showed that 71% of the corporate marketers are either currently or will be exhibiting internationally in the next 18 to 24 months. The world's getting smaller every day. Ryan, you've got 3 shows globally. Talk a little bit about how those 3 and then kind of the common engagement across them.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So IAPA has 3 different shows. One is in Orlando every year. It was just 2 weeks ago. And we have one in Asia in June, and we have one in Europe in September. We've had, those 3 have been part of our portfolio of events for a good 10 or 12 years, something like that, in tandem with each other. We're fortunate in that we're still seeing steady but limited growth here in the United States. This is the show that we have here in Orlando is our big flagship event. We had, just a couple weeks ago, like I mentioned, we had 35,000 total participants and a little over 570,000 net square feet of exhibit space, 1,000 plus exhibitors. But that's our fastest growing shows are our European and our Asian shows. We had our show in Shanghai this year in June, and that experienced year-over-year growth of about 25 to 30%. And being able to capitalize on the growth of our industry overseas has been very fortunate for us that we're in the right place at the right time, and that the people that preceded me had the foresight to establish relationships and shows in some of those regions. What's interesting is that all 3 of our shows are growing. All 3 shows set records this year for attendance and exhibit space. So we're not seeing yet that any of the respective shows are cannibalizing each other. Certainly that was part of our concern, is that as the Asian show grows, that we'll see that come at the expense of some of the others. In addition, but we haven't seen that. It's, as the industry goes, we're growing proportionally across the board. Additionally, the number of companies that exhibit in all 3 shows have grown from 80 just a few years ago to about 160 now. So we have 160 companies out of the 1,000 in our Orlando show that not only participate in Orlando, but all 3 of our respective shows, because they need to go to where the buyers are. Not all of those amusement parks, attractions, facilities are coming to Orlando. They recognize that. They need to go to where the buyers are, where the money is, where the facilities are being built. And a lot of times that means going to Europe and Asia. So we work with exhibitors and, again, agencies and a number of different stakeholders globally to be able to put those events on to make sure that we're providing the right value to all of those respective exhibitors and attendees.
And Suzanne, you just did international, and the partnership back to the exhibit house and getting your solutions and,
Yeah.
and that linkage with this group. Talk a little bit about that.
We're doing more and more international events, and most of them have a U.S. component, and then they go to a European component, and in one case we also have an Asian event. We participate in all of them, and it's critical for me to have the same look and feel across all three shows. But my messaging is often different. There's a different sales cycle, there's a different level of decision maker, and so we craft the messaging slightly differently. But the look and feel of my company needs to be instantly recognizable on the show floor, whether it's our colors or the structure that we have there. And I rely on my exhibit house to help keep our brand consistent. But I also rely on their innovation and their creativity. And the open communication that we have allows them to say to me, yeah, that's not going to work. And to have me believe that and listen to them and to work towards something that is right for an international audience or an international look and feel that may be slightly different in an Asian market or US market.
So David and Julie, certainly when you're traveling on behalf of IAEE, you're seeing a lot of the kind of growing up of the trade show and event world globally. Talk a little bit about what you guys are seeing on an international basis.
Boss always goes first, right?
Well, certainly there is a huge appetite around the world. We have a huge level of engagement in our CEM program right now, our Certified in Exhibition Management program. We have, I believe, 2,400 CEMs worldwide now. I think 26 countries is where we have CEM classes at this point in time. So there's a huge appetite to learn more about our model because, clearly we all want to be able to service our clients, whether they're show organizers or exhibitors, wherever they are in the world. And everybody travels now.
And we, Randy, 3 years ago we had members in about 30 countries, now 52. And as Julie said, where we grow our membership is based around the educational opportunities that we provide. And 2 years ago, an embryo of growth was planted in India, and we now graduated our first class in the spring of this year, 37 students. They have a small infrastructure. There might be 5 or 6 decent exhibition centers across India. Their plans in the next 10 years with an aggressive international trade focus from their current leadership is to double that. We graduated 57 in Thailand, and these are places, Randy, where the workforce opportunities for growth and getting people involved in the exhibition industry is very, very important. So we partner with governments. As Julie said, 26 countries. We partner with governments, and they actually hold the license agreements. In China alone, we have over 800 CEMs out of 2,400 because we partnered, 10 or 12 years ago with the Chinese government. So those are examples where truly every day this world is shrinking, and it's our job as an international association, as it is for Ryan as an international association, to grow, in his case, the amusement parks industry. It's ours is to grow, especially the workforce, the labor that we need to take, as Julie said earlier, to take our places as we retire.
Well, and globally, you got UFI growing, you got FAMAB, you've got IFAS, you've got EDPA's membership growing, IAE's is growing. So the reality is international is here to stay. Proprietary events, as we wind down, is one of the things that I talked about this the other day in one of the sessions from the audience, and there's a guy in the room that I met with a few weeks ago who said to me when we were talking about the latest research study that 89% of our corporate marketers that read Exhibitor told us that they're not only responsible for trade shows, they're responsible for their company's events. Holy Christ. That has been on a growth curve, but it was typically about 2/3 for probably 4 or 5 years, and then keeps moving itself up. And the reality is that this guy that I was talking to, he says, well, I'm not surprised because all of my major clients that I do trade show work for are doing events. And I said, all is a pretty big all. And he said, all of them? He says, no, really, all of them are doing events, and he's lucky enough to be helping them do those events. So when you're looking at what kind of spend, I mean, that research that came back, we're talking big budgets here, $685,000 budget, average budget. 40% of them are renting convention centers for the execution of their events. One of my panelists on our road tour just walked away from a show and is doing a user group forum. The first year was so successful, she thinks she's going to double it for year 2, and she's going to create a road show tour for it. So that's a reality that show organizers are realizing, that they need to create alternatives, that exhibitors can do events within their events and not be in that no mode that Ryan was talking about. Let's sit down and talk. Because Suzanne's peers are willing to pay for it. They're not asking for it for free. They just don't want to be gouged and be back to that humongous money stream that the show organizer, they view, was typically looking for. So as you're going forward, as we're wrapping this thing up, because Jeff is whispering in my ear down here, the reality is that corporate events are going to be part of your conversations in mass if they aren't already. You know, as we're closing out here, you know, we really keep talking about you have the power to engage on behalf of your customers, engage the stakeholders. So let's close out with your closing thoughts. What do you want to leave behind? Let's start with Suzanne. What do you want to leave behind with the audience?
Communication is key. Build the relationship with your exhibit house, with your service providers, even with the show organizers and general contractors. I am never the biggest exhibitor on a show floor, but at every single show I attend, I go behind the curtain and introduce myself to the Freemans or the GESs and just say, hi, I'm Suzanne and I'm in booth number, and I give them the booth number and take their mints or their candy and then go back to my booth. But if I do have to go back, I feel like I've at least opened the door for conversation. We all want the same end result. So communication and collaboration, and never ever overlook the details that your show organizer gives to you at the beginning. Those become a set of guidelines for me to build out the entire event. And I know a lot of people, a lot of exhibitors tend to overlook the quick facts documents or the know before you go. And they're critical to your success. So engage right at the beginning, and you'll have a good end result.
Ryan, what do you like to leave behind?
I'll echo the same thing. I think communication is most critical. If you're working with, certainly with your exhibitors, having that conversation with show management, we do have ultimately the same end goal. My goal isn't to sell the most booth space to any one company in a given year. I want to make sure that we have a good long-term relationship with a company so that they're there for the long haul, and making sure that not necessarily the price is right, but the value is right. I want to make sure and ensure that you're seeing, you collectively with your clients, the exhibitors at the end of the day, are seeing the attendees that you want to see. If you're not being fed the information that you need in terms of show demographics or attendee engagement, the numbers, and so forth, make sure you're asking the right questions. I'm certainly happy to go back and do some digging. If you say I need to do a little cross tab of, you know, a certain demographic from this region, we'll go find that. And that's not, just because it's not in a prospectus doesn't mean that I don't have access to that information if that's what's important to you and your client. But the first and foremost in that is having that relationship and having that engagement with you and the attendees and the exhibitors to make sure that we're all cooperating as part of the same ecosystem.
Julie?
Beautiful segue into mine, which is that we are all part of a codependent ecosystem. We're not enemies. And the only way that our mutual clients will succeed is, yes, we might compete sometimes, but we need to have ongoing dialogue. We need to recognize that we have mutual goals of making the exhibitors successful, and therefore the show organizers successful.
David?
3 bullet points. June 7th, mark your calendar, join us. Exhibitions Day, Washington, D.C. I'll comp everybody's registration in this room.
And Global Exhibitions.
And then Global Exhibitions Day, which is celebrated around the world with over 60 countries participating. Secondly is safety and security. You'll be hearing more about it. Please engage, help us to support and enhance the protection of all of us that work in buildings, hotel ballrooms. And third is to make sure that After next week, you access the IAEE.com website and take a look at the 4th annual Global Trends white paper that could help you and your clients as we go forward, to Julie's point.
And for me, it's really about getting engaged. Justin Hirsch, you're a good poster child for this. Kelly Glasser, one of the things I know you walked out of Sear Predict learning a lot about other stakeholders in the business's perspective on what we do. And I would tell you, you don't have to go to all of these meetings, but you should go to some of these meetings. Get yourself engaged. You will learn things that I know Justin is bringing back to his clients that he learned when he's at other stakeholder events. Justin, is that out of line? It's accurate. So that's my closing. You've got an opportunity right now to proactively engage as an advocate and an agency consultant to your client. The more you know, the better you are at that. So thank you to my panel for being willing to share.